Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to my review for the Power Rangers Lightning Collection Yellow Ranger Aisha and Scorpina 2-pack. So this is a unique release as it includes our first ever Scorpina figure in the Lightning Collection, and honestly one of our first ever Scorpina figures. I feel like I remember us getting a monster version of her in the old Monsters line, but I think this is our first humanoid Scorpina figure that I'm aware of, both for the US and Japan. And this is our second MMPR Yellow release. It's effectively a re-release. The only significant difference, in my opinion, is the Aisha head, so you kind of have to double dip, but we'll get into that later. Let's go over the accessories quick before I forget. Obviously, you have the weapons they're both holding, which I'll go over. But for Scorpina, you have two alternate hands, which are effectively two, like, almost closed hands. Like, this one's more closed and this one's, like, almost closed, so you only have one alternate set. You get your standard effect parts. You get two kind of blasting-looking effect parts here. They kind of look more like the blaster ones you get, but they're not for the tips of the daggers. And then you have this lightning effect part here, hence Lightning Collection. You have Aisha's alternate hands here, which is one karate chop hand and one holding weapon hand. You also have the blade blaster, which you can see on her holster, which I'll get to there, but then you also have the dagger version of it. And of course, you have Aisha's head sculpt here. This one obviously taking from early season 2 when she first showed up. I think they did a pretty decent job at it. I think it's a pretty decent likeness. It's not my exact favorite Aisha look and hairstyle. I felt they looked just so 90s when they first showed up, and I kind of would have preferred one from later on when she had the longer hair, since that's usually what I think of when I think of her. But I imagine they're saving that for some sort of future release. But, you know, it's not bad, and this really is the only significant difference. Let's go over the figures now. I'm going to start with Scorpina, since she's actually the only new one. And I think they did a pretty decent job here with her. I think the head sculpt, it looks a little bit dead. Like, I mean, it has like kind of a blank stare. It doesn't have a lot of personality. I feel they could have maybe given it a little bit of an evil smirk or an evil look. But I think it's a decent likeness, and honestly, I'm fine with it. It's not a huge deal. With a lot of these ones, they can be hit and miss and have like a lifeless look, and sometimes I want a little something more from it, which is the case here, but it doesn't bother me too much. But other than that, I think they did a good job on it. I think they did a good job on the proportions. I think they did a good job on the armor in terms of the detail and proportion. I think feels like weirdly out of proportion. Maybe it could be a little bit golder, but I think for the most part, I'm happy with it. In fact, the only color place I have problems with here is her leg. Maybe it's probably just me. This is honestly just a personal nitpick, but this feels a little bit too yellow. It looks a little bit out of place. It almost looks like she stole one of Aisha's legs and put it on here. It just looks a little bit strange. But this is a good example of something that, is this worth freaking out about? Is it going to stop me from buying the figure? No. For a lot of people, unfortunately, the answer would be yes. But it just bothers me a little bit. It just looks a little strange, and I feel the color could be calibrated on that a little bit. And like I said, maybe the gold could be a little bit golder, but for what it is, I'm honestly happy with it. I don't really have too huge of a problem with it there. You have your standard articulation. You have a hinge joint right here, and you have a ball joint here on the arm, swiveling all around. Elbow joint right here, swiveling at the fists. Nice ball joint at the leg for all-around movement. Double knee joint there. You have your nice little hinge joint on the foot. You have your waist and your chest articulation, because you kind of like the guy figures. She has this little hinge joint here, and then you have the ball joint here on her chest. And of course, you have a nice ball joint on her head. However, it's a little bit hindered by her hair because it's a solid piece, so you're going to have to do some finagling. Like, you might have to pull this up a little bit if you want to turn this a little bit. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with in your standard figure, but not that huge of a deal. It's not like she has a huge armor getting in the way. And you can see here she comes with her weapon, which actually is pretty nicely done. Like, it looks a little bit boring, and it's not the world's most exciting weapon, but what I like about it is actually it's a painted, kind of faded gray, and they didn't just put a generic, boring gray PR weapon. That's like the most common thing you see with so many PR toys, is that generic PR gray weapon, and I feel like they very easily could have done that, and I like that it's actually painted, and it makes it look a lot better and classier. And, you know, overall, I think it's a decent figure. If you guys know my channel, you know I'm not as into the villain figures, so I wasn't as stoked about this as a lot of people, but I totally understand why people are excited about it, considering we've never really gotten a Scorpina figure before, and I think it's a very decent first figure. I'm not exactly blown away by it. There's little nitpicks here and there and things I think they could do better, but for the most part, I'm happy with it for what it is. Now let's talk about Yellow Ranger here. So you have her power daggers, just like with the other one. They look pretty much identical. You know, they're fine. You know, they did a good job on the paint. They have all the paint they need. I really don't need anything more intricate. You have the little things there for combining. You have the blade blaster here that's removable. For the most part, it's basically the same figure as the old one. In fact, before we fully go over it, I'm going to bring in the old one right here. And this looks a little taller, but that's just because she's standing straight up and she is, you know, kind of crouched a little bit. But they're basically the same figure. The only difference I can detect to the untrained eye is this one is a little bit of a lighter yellow color. Like, the proportions all look the same. Her elbow's kind of backwards, but that's my fault. But the head sculpts are basically identical. I mean, there might be a little detail here I'm not noticing, but for me, it's the same thing. Like, there's been a couple updated figures where the head sculpt's a little bit different, like one's a little skinnier. They changed the visor a little bit on one of them or something, but this one, they look identical. There's really no difference outside of this color being a little bit lighter, which I didn't necessarily expect anything, because I didn't have any problems with this mold. You know, like, for me, the Black Ranger's helmet is off, Red's is way off, and they fixed those in the upcoming metallic figures. But for Yellow, I didn't really have too many problems with it, so this wasn't really a case where I was hoping they would fix something with this release. But, you know, it's definitely the same figure, except for the color. With that being said, I think it's a decent figure. I think the head sculpt's pretty decent. It's kind of more reminiscent of the MMPR version of the suit in the show, rather than the Jew Ranger one. I feel the Jew Ranger one, when you see the footage, the neck's a little bit longer, you have a little bit less of a neck here, but I think the helmet proportions look good. The light yellow does look good. I mean, I always say the MMPR colors and detail are hard to mess up, because you really only have to get the main color and then the white diamonds, so it looks fine. You have some pretty decent-ish details on the Morphin there. Like, you can kind of make out the saber-toothed tiger, which, you know, it's not the greatest, but it's pretty solid. And articulation-wise, the same exact as Poison Ivy, same exact as Scorpina, and no loose joint problems on either of them, so no problems there. So overall, what's the final verdict for this? Honestly, it's not a perfect set, but I think this is a solid set release. The recommendation's kind of weird, because it kind of depends on where you're at in your collection and where you want to be. Like, if you already have Yellow, and you're not that interested in Scorpina out of completion's sake, then I don't know, maybe pass for it, or wait for a sale or something like that if you can find it. But if you already have a Yellow and you're really interested in Scorpina, maybe. But I can definitely recommend this to those of you that don't have Yellow in your collection and you were planning on getting her and you either just haven't gotten around to it or you missed out on it. You're going to be getting Scorpina with this. I think I could definitely recommend it to those people that don't have Yellow. I do think it's kind of an unfortunate set in terms of having to double dip with MMPR Yellow to get a figure we've never gotten before. I understand why they do it, because they're not sure if Scorpina is going to sell so well to the casual audience, so they want to include a little bit more incentive. But it just kind of sucks to have to do that, again, with a figure we've never gotten before. It's kind of different when you have, you know, a character we've gotten different iterations for, but I'm sure there's people out there that have been waiting for a Scorpina figure and don't want to have to pay the double pack price and possibly get another MMPR Yellow. So I would say this is a solid pack. It's just an unfortunate double dipping situation. But that's about it for this one, guys. Until next time, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.